On today's episode, we're discussing how to arm yourself with defaults, a simple way to solidify your decision-making on the Fireground.
The Fireground Company Podcast.
Ready?
Yes.
Here we go. Welcome back to the Fire Company. Nope, we're not the Fire Company. I'm just going to start that again. Welcome back to the Fireground Company Podcast. I'm pretty excited about today's episode because we've got some secret sauce for you that's going to help you get your mind right on the Fireground. This applies to officers, but also could be engine drivers, aerial operators, firefighters, even BCs. We're talking about defaults. Cap, we've discussed this topic a lot on the rig. It seems to me that one of the markers of a great fire officer or even firefighter is their ability to make good decisions under stress. And when I try to get inside your head and study how you are able to cope with the stressors and make solid decisions, it seems to always come back to defaults. I admire your ability to walk into any situation and start making solid decisions right away. You never seem overwhelmed. You just kind of meet each new challenge as a decision point. And you've told me before that one of the secrets to your ability to do that is that you know what you want to do in most situations, and then you adapt to challenges as they come up. So today, I'd like to get inside your head on the Fireground a little bit and unpack this concept of defaults. So let's get started. Kat, tell me first, what is a default?
First, I think you made me sound too good. So I still struggle with all this stuff like everyone else. I guess I just want to give a little background on it first. So at a certain point in our department, I was asked to help out with an officer development program. And when you start trying to teach other people, I think you really start understanding, you really start understanding the concepts you're trying to teach. So the faults started with that. It became a way of me figuring out how to explain the decisions I make, that I found a system that worked for me. So obviously stress can be overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I realized pretty quick getting promoted, especially, I mean, even as a firefighter, I had some of this, but I had to figure out a system for this. So when you're asking me what a default is, I mean, of course you have your standard operating policies, your SOGs, whatever you call them again, they're official. So those are your official defaults. Those are written out procedures, and they're a framework for making fast decisions, right? Because if you know those policies, you kind of plug them in. It's like, oh, I see this. It's this building. The fire is on the second floor. Line goes here. We search here. Ladders go here. Boom. That's a default. That's the official ones. So that takes pressure off you, right? Because you don't have to come up with the plan. You know this is the situation, and this is what we do. I'm going to default to this. But you still have to be a thinking firefighter, or you still have to be a thinking officer. So it doesn't always fit into the perfect little box.
But there is more to it than just knowing those inside and out, right? Because I've seen it happen where a situation doesn't fit neatly into the bounds of an SOP. And I've seen it paralyze some people when it just goes a little bit outside of the framework of what we've been told to do in certain situations. So what can you do to be ready for anything? How do you become a versatile decision maker that's not locked into a script?
You need to have your defaults at the ready. Your defaults. SOPs, SOGs, they still have gray areas, right? You read through them and it's not going to apply to every single situation. And sometimes it's not going to tell you how to get from A to B. You got to figure that out with basic tactics, basic skills. So you got to figure out what your defaults are, and it's hard, of course, to make decisions under pressure consistently. But if you have some of your own defaults of how if this situation presents, I'm going to do this, then it frees your mind up for making other decisions.
Yeah, you've said that before to me, that having the defaults frees up your mind to make fewer decisions, and I love that. Honestly, I try to do that not just at work, but kind of in life in general. Reduce decisions that have to be made, and I've heard that from a lot of places, that that's a key to success or progress, is having fewer decisions to make because you have some sort of already made at the ready. And another thing is, it's not just about the decisions that you make, but actually learning how to make decisions, right? I think sometimes we become so wrapped up in spitting out the right answers. I'm making quotey fingers, and I know this podcast is on video, so you can't see that, but spitting out the right answers.
They look good.
Yeah, that's quotey fingers. That we never learn how to actually think for ourselves. So, how do you actually come up with your defaults?
That starts with, you got to think about what's going to put you in the best position most of the time. I like to say, if this, then that. I don't know, in my head, that just works well. If this happens, then I'll do that. So I may have 3 or 4 of those in my head. The defaults also come into play. The most likely, unlikely. I know that kind of sounds weird, but most of the time things go well. What's likely to happen that's not going to go well? Off the top of my head, it could be something along the lines of, we stretch the hose line to the wrong location. So that's maybe unlikely, but it's an likely unlikely. So what should we do? Do we leave the hose line there and do we stretch another one? Do we move the actual hose line itself? You're searching in a normal size apartment and you get disoriented. So what do you? It's a likely, most likely unlikely, I guess, if that makes sense. I know that sounds weird, but that's just how my mind works. It helped me. So what do? Oh, you get to a wall, you try and find a window, an orientation point. So think about things that could happen. I guess things that you need to be prepared for in case they appear, but they're usually not the things that happen every day. And we can't go out and plan for these the catastrophic, crazy situations. We can't game plan all that, but we can game plan some stuff that could go wrong and be prepared for that.
You said that in the rig the other day, and I love that phrase, the most likely, unlikely thing. Another concept that's been very valuable to me, which kind of expands on the concept of defaults, and you sort of touched on it, talking about if this, then that. That's what I call decision matrices. And this is basically just a preloaded list of if-thens. Basically, if you have your default, but if you can't do that, you do this. If you can't do that, you do this. I found 3 to be sort of a magic number for these kinds of things. 3 variations of a skill will get you through most anything, and that works on all sorts of different tasks, whether it's stretching hose, ladders, forcible entry, victim removal, apparatus positioning, all sorts of stuff. You just work your way down the matrix. I want to do number 1, but if I can't, I'm ready with number 2. And if number 2 doesn't work, then I'm ready with number 3. And we use this concept when we teach different hose stretch options. And I think it helps it click for people. And that makes me think of probably one of my absolute favorite sayings in the fire department, which is try harder, try something else. I love that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Another concept I want to touch on is something we believe in, and I don't think we can stress enough, and that is that you have to be solid on the basics. The basic skills have to be second nature so that performing them doesn't take up mental real estate. We want thinking firefighters and officers, but you can't process new input if your bandwidth is taken up just performing basic skills, right?
The less you have to think about, the more room in your head you have to make these other decisions. We've talked about that, but that it really holds true under stress. And you can have simple scenario plans, simple things like one of the ones I like for car fires to get a line and service real quick that we use is a simple scenario of one of the firefighters gets out, they deploy the hose line, get water in the line, and then they start knocking the fire down from afar, not right up on it. And while the other firefighter is masking up, officers masking up, and then masked up firefighter takes the line from the other firefighter and then moves in. So now there's very little delay. That's a simple plan that you can use over and over, and that's our default plan for car fires. So we have something figured out, and we don't have to, if the pressure's on and there's a bad situation, maybe there's someone inside that car or something, or there's a report of someone inside that car, we're not making that plan up going down the road. We already have that default. That's our standard default that we came up with as a company. And that frees up now space for other things. If there's other things going on the, that scene, everyone knows what their job is, and they can do that. And they can also start thinking about some of the other things if they have to, and they're ready for that.
So back to your personal defaults for a second. Can you give me an example off the top of your head of a default that you rely on often?
Yeah, one of the ones I use a lot, and it became crystal clear for me actually when we were on a call, is conflicting information and how to deal with that. So what I'm talking about is if I have conflicting information as far as in that situation that I'm thinking of is the side of the building that the fire's on. So maybe I have conflicting information that it's on the Alpha side or it's on the Charlie side, and that kind of goes back and forth, and it doesn't really seem certain. And most of the time our SOPs are set up where the first engine runs the front of the building, and second engine helps with that water supply, the third engine goes to the Charlie side, and then the fourth engine helps with that water supply. So if I get that conflicting information, I've just found that things tend to go smoother if you stay to the normal plan. So I've decided if I don't know which way to run it, I'm just going to, as the first engine, I'm just going to run it as normal. I'm going to run side Alpha and go from there. And there's a reason we have a third engine that goes to Charlie. That's their job, to make sure everything's good to go on side Charlie, get another line in service. And if it's back there, they're ready. I'm just going to let it play out that way. And that I think has helped me, because you can go in your head back and forth, and you have the driver looking at you saying, what do you want to do? I don't know. And you get to a point, you got to make a decision. So make the decision, commit to it, and then figure out from there if there's something else you can do, but have that ready to go. And that's one that I really, lean on. Conflicting information, run the Alpha side, let the SOP play out like normal, do your job.
Yeah, and every department's a little bit different. So depending on your SOPs, your first due, your staffing, all that stuff, your defaults are going to look a little different. I don't think we're trying to sell you on specific defaults.
No, not at all.
Although we would encourage you to keep them simple, right?
Yeah.
But what we're trying to impress is how effective having defaults is, no matter what they are. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the point of this. You got to look at your situation, your department, and what that is. I mean, again, it's these gray areas. That's what when I was helping with officer development program and helping, officers go through and make those decisions, and thinking about myself and how I struggled with those decisions and got a little clearer on them. And it really, for me, what kind of got me organized and focused was those gray areas, figuring out those areas that aren't spelled out, what we would do, and how to deal with that. I mean, again, I like giving examples. This may not be exactly how you do things, but an example for me is, say we have, first engine goes in and they stretch a hose line to the fire's on the second floor, whatever, single family house. Hose line goes up to the second floor, right? First line, start knocking down fire. You're supposed to, the way we work, you're supposed to stretch a second line that is, it could be a backup line, or it could knock down, fire in other locations, right? That's what it says. It doesn't go into a ton of detail of exactly what to do. So to me, that gray area was, when I became an officer, I'm like, well, how you have to actually make the decisions. You're like, well, how far should that line go? Should it go to just stay at the bottom of the steps? Should it go up the steps? Should it stay at the top of the steps once it gets up there? Should it go to another room? And for me, the answer, there's a whole bunch of different scenarios that can play out. And that's where I kind of have these defaults and these gray areas. So I'll get to the line to the point where it's like, all right, we're going to get it to the bottom of the steps, somewhere around there, and then figure out where it needs to go. So we get it to the bottom of the steps. That's my point where now I make another decision. I know it needs to be ready to go up there. Does it go all the way up? So it depends to me on the progress. Is that line making progress or not? The first line, do they need assistance up there? Is it a small house? Can we go up the stairs? Are there firefighters moving hose line on the stairs? So there's all questions that play into it. If at that point, when I make that decision, if it makes sense to move another line up there because they have more fire that they can't take care of with that one line, all right, that's the next decision. So we're going to, move it up there. And then once you get to the top of the steps, well, where does it go? Does it go to this? So, I mean, that's, like I said, that's the iterative decision-making with that gray area of, yeah, we need a second line, but, is it just backing up that first line because they have a lot of fire, or is it going to another area? So that's where you got to come up with the defaults, and you got to ask other officers. You got to pay attention to what other people do and study, read. I mean, you gotta put some effort into this.
Yeah, I think those defaults kind of get you started. It makes it so that you start moving in a direction. And if you couple that with that sort of iterative decision making, you get started on the road based on, I know I want to do this. I know I want to do this. And that gets you in action, and then if you have the ability to get started down the right path, and then able to stop and step back for a second and have those decision points where it's like, okay, now this. And like you said, I think it's particularly useful for officers just because they have to make so many decisions on a fireground. But I've definitely found it useful at the firefighter level too.
What's the default you have?
That's a good question.
You got to have something. You're usually driving. You got to have some, with the hydrant or the hose lines, or, there's.
It's funny you say that because, you're kind of exposing something to me that I need to work on, which is actually going through and like spelling out some, because I have them, but at this point in my career, they're so built in.
Yeah.
And that's the point, kind of, right, is with these defaults, is that they're no longer taking up bandwidth in my mind. They're things that I just automatically start doing.
Yeah, you probably don't even think about them that way. You probably, like you said, they're built in. So I bet you have a bunch, but that's just what I do. That's just how I do it.
And I'm sure this is true for you too, but a lot of the defaults are reactive. And I hate to say that because everybody wants to be fully prepared, right? But a lot of my lessons and defaults come from something going wrong on a call. Yeah. And in that moment, I say to myself, okay, this happened. And luckily, if you're prepared with a good skill set, you start thinking, I know it's a kind of tired cliche, this analogy of the toolbox.
Yeah.
I used to work in construction though. And it's really true. Like something goes wrong. So instead of freaking out and being like, this is out of the bounds of my normal operation, I don't know what to do, it really does feel kind of like you go into a toolbox and start searching around for the tool to fix this problem. And that I encounter that with driving a lot. Is I've had all sorts of things happen to me. We had a huge high-rise fire where the fire department connection literally exploded. I went to connect to it and it exploded. And now it's raining water all over the place and I can't even get back to the connection. And you have to kind of work through that. So we were the secondary water supply, so I knew they had a primary water supply, so I knew I could shut it down for a second, figure out what's going wrong, put a cap on the side that exploded. There, once I was able to get back to it, I realized there was still one good connection. So anyway, the specifics aren't really important, but the point is that that moment made me say, all right, my default here based on the SOPs didn't work. So now I got to rummage through my toolbox and figure out what works next, what the next step is. And that's where it becomes, for anybody, whether it's firefighter, level, driver, officer, you have to have that solid foundation. You have to have tools in your toolbox to rummage through. And if you do, then you encounter that situation and you overcome it. But then you don't just walk away from that call. You process that and you file it and you say, all right, so next time this happens, and there will be a next time. Again, like I said, I've had all sorts of things happen, whether it's with hydrants or, hose bursting or connections. There's always something crazy around the corner waiting for you. And you can't, like you said, you can't specifically prepare for every individual situation, but what you can prepare is your toolbox. So if the first thing you go to do doesn't work, it doesn't throw you off your game. You just go back into your toolbox and you say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's do this now. And you can usually counter this. So I think I have a lot of defaults. I just haven't given words to them yet. I need to, maybe that's something, and maybe we'll catch up again on another episode and I can nail those down a little bit. But believe me when I say that I definitely have them. They're just so ingrained in my bones at this point. I'd have to really stop and think about what they actually are.
Yeah, I'll give one that I think is worth people walking away with to think about is officer or firefighter. When do you get on the radio? There's a lot of situations like when do I say this on the radio if you're having a problem? So if you're having a problem with the water supply, when does that become something you should say on the radio? Not just a difficulty, you're having. At what point does it truly become a problem? You got to kind of think about that because it may just be a tough hydrant to open. It may be something small. It may take a second, but there is a breakover that most of the time isn't spelled out in anything, any fire department textbook or anything like that. Or, I get on the radio. When is it really a mayday? When am I really lost? What is that breakover? Do I have a default for that? Probably should. I mean, if I look for, try and reorient myself, there's a certain point where, it happens to everyone. You get a little disoriented on a fire inside. Now I'm disoriented and I haven't figured it out. Well, no one spells that out typically. There's not like a little stopwatch you usually have. So you need to think about that.
Yeah.
When do I get on the radio for a lot of these different things? And that's what the defaults are, something beforehand, thinking about it. But I think that's a good one to walk away with. If you want to start somewhere, start with figuring out officer or firefighter, think about some situations and when you would actually get on the radio, because that's a pretty black and white moment of what you need to do. So walk away with that, think about that moment. And I think if you can think of 3 or 4 different things, that's going to be helpful if they ever come up.
Yeah, and I think that it's a good example too, because there's kind of extremes on either end, right? There is a sweet spot, like there is a lot of this stuff. So there's the right time, and then there's examples that we've seen of people who say too much on the radio, that just like every step they take or breath they take needs to be voiced on the radio. But then there's also the other side of it where there's stuff that needs to be said that doesn't get said. And we've seen that with some neighboring jurisdictions that just don't say anything on the radio. So, that's a good example because there is a sweet spot. And just, I know we're wrapping up here, but one point that brought to mind too is that defaults aren't just what they're not just useful in themselves as a tool, but they're useful in what they open up. So they reduce the chances of you getting sucked into a specific situation because, and as you were talking there,
that's a good point.
Yeah, I was thinking like the people who can make good decisions are the people, and I hate to keep using this term, but who have the mental bandwidth to kind of zoom out a little bit and see what's going. So like that water supply situation you talked about, right?
Hmm.
For a a driver that's sort of flailing around and isn't confident and doesn't have that mental bandwidth, they're going to that problem that's in front of them is going to become their whole world, and they're going to forget that there is a whole scene going on at the same time as they're dealing with
Hmm.
that problem. And by having that toolbox ready and those defaults ready, you can basically say to yourself, okay, hold on, there's more going on than just what I'm doing right now. But if you can, so, maybe you can handle that situation, or maybe it's going to take a minute. And as soon as you start to feel like this is going to affect more than just my little world right here, this is going to affect the scene. And
Yeah.
I think, part of it is experience. As you get more into the job, your vision opens up. You start to see the fire ground and not just yourself. But that's kind of when it starts to come in. All right, do I get on the radio for this? I don't know. Is this a problem I need to just solve right now by myself? Then do it. Get to work. Is this a problem that maybe it's going to take a little bit to solve?
Yeah.
Maybe I've got to do some outside of the box kind of things here, and it's going to start affecting the flow of the whole fire ground. And I think that's when you have those defaults, you start action starts,
Yeah.
and then you can use your brain to start thinking, okay, what's the next level effects of this right now?
Yeah. It's a breakover moment when it's good you said that. When you start thinking about it affecting the whole operation, that's a pretty clear, that's all right. Now, this is, yes, that moment when you see that, that needs to get out to everyone. So that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I guess that the kind of one of the takeaways is that when you have these established defaults and you've worked through them, you've put in the effort to really work them out, it gives you confidence.
And there's tons of them. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking it starts becoming, there are so many, it's kind of hard to just sit here and think about, oh, well, but if you start thinking through previous incidents you've been on, well, what should I do in this situation? And I guess this is the thing that, again, I'm trying to get through to the firefighters and not just the officers. Don't be a mindless firefighter just following the officer around. Watch them, good or bad, and learn from what they're doing and why they're doing it. At first, that's kind of hard, but as time goes on, that'll make you a better firefighter, because if you're paying attention to what the officer is doing, not only does that prepare you for a track of becoming an officer and understanding that process when if you're ready for that step, but if you just want to be a great firefighter, you have to do that. You have to pay attention to what the officer is doing, and when you can start anticipating their steps and doing things before they even ask
Mm.
it to be done, be ready. I'm not saying freelance go do whatever, but what I'm saying is be ready for what they need, and on scene if you're the driver, or be ready for what they're going to ask you to do, force this door. Start thinking about those things. That's where you really can start becoming that solid go-to firefighter, and someone that maybe one day, if it's right for you, take the promotion, and it's going to make it easier. So, I mean, the defaults there's so much to it. It's such a building block of getting better at the job. I mean, I feel like I could go on and on. And the more I sit here, the more I think about, like, yeah, I had to make a choice here, and that was kind of a default I leaned on. But yeah, it's
I
cool.
had a thought while you were talking right there,
Yeah.
and it just kind of was like, whoa, that's it.
Hmm.
Because I started thinking about, we like to lean on the past a lot, and we like look at
Yeah.
some of these like legendary firefighters, and of course they're getting all this experience, so they have defaults based on fire after fire after fire. And just thinking about the power of that, and I was kind of thinking like, yeah, that's what they had reliable defaults. But
Yeah.
here's the thought that came to me, is that it starts with defaults, but defaults eventually become instincts.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Good call.
And that's what I see in firefighters that I admire, or that I look up to, or have in the past, whether they or ones that I read about or ones that I've actually met, and their effort on the Fireground becomes instinctive. Like they just think with the firefighter's brain. And I think in the modern fire service, you start by establishing defaults in sort of this kind of systematic way. Like I look at this and I say, okay, my default's going to be this, but eventually over time, over repetitions, that becomes your firefighter instincts.
Yeah, it is an instinctual thing. And I guess we're putting more of a official name and process
Right,
to it, I
right.
guess is what the defaults are. It's an official way of kind of setting up those instincts. But yeah,
But start now, right? Like
Yeah,
start now. If you
yeah.
want to become that, and that's how
Yeah.
a lot of things go. At first, it seems like a process. It seems like work, and a lot of people just want to skip to that point where they're like, "Well, I'm just a badass,
Yeah.
and I have these great instincts and stuff." But what and that's true of anybody, whether it's a great athlete, a great musician, whatever. What you see is the result of all the work they've already put in, right? And you see what that looks like. So start now. Start thinking about defaults. It might feel a little official, or it might feel, putting these words to it, but that's what it feels like at this point, right? Is put the work in, think about it, consider it, and eventually, if you stick to it, it will, on the Fireground, it will materialize as what you want it to be, which is this. It looks effortless. It looks instinctual, but it's not. You got to put the work in first.
Yeah. Well, that's the secret to it. You got to put the work in it. It's
That's
not
the
automatic.
secret sauce.
Secret sauce. Yeah.
All right. Secret sauce, defaults.
I think that's about everything. I think we covered it pretty good. So
Awesome. Thanks for listening.
thanks for stopping by. Check us out at firegroundcompany.com. You'll find links to all our social media accounts and our YouTube channel, and you'll stay up to date on everything we're working on. We also have a store on our website where you can support us as we grow this community, plus working on some great courses to help you strengthen your leadership in the fire department and support its traditions and culture. Last but not least, subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, leave a comment, spread the word, get this out to the firefighters who are hungry to make the job even better.
The Fireground Company Podcast.